The 19th century had its scramble for Africa, but the 21st, its scramble for the Arctic? It's always been inhospitable for people, but strategy and greed for resources may have awakened the acquisitive urge once more. So, the Arctic. What is there to scramble for? Do join me, Jan Darasz, for How We Got Here.
As the Russian invasion of Ukraine continues, its implications for Arctic geopolitics are becoming more evident. And even though direct military conflict in the Arctic is unlikely, Russia's aggressive economic and territorial ambitions for the region are prompting other Arctic states to reassess their strategies. For instance, Russian company Novatek confirmed that it aims to complete all 3 production lines of Arctic LNG 2 by 2026. Western sanctions have been able to delay the project, but work at the construction site continues. Novatek appears confident that it will be able to complete its Arctic LNG 2 plant as designed, despite the barrage of Western sanctions. Russian military officials have emphasized the importance of economic development and sovereignty defense in the Arctic, prioritizing the region as a key area for national security and economic growth.
No kyllä kai tällä hetkellä tilanne on kuitenkin se, että nuo tukikohdat tuossa etenkin Suomen rajan lähellä ovat aika hiljaisia. Sieltä on
Russia's approach, as laid out in several recent strategic documents, suggests a commitment to extending jurisdiction over the Arctic and exploiting its rich availability of natural resources. This model contrasts with the diplomatic framework established by the 2008 Ilulissat Declaration, which aims for cooperative settling of jurisdictional issues among the Arctic states. The overlapping claims of Canada, Denmark and Russia on parts of the Arctic, particularly along the Lomonosov Ridge, could lead to hostile negotiations. To mitigate these risks, Canada, Denmark and the US and NATO as a whole are forced to develop capabilities like icebreakers, submarines and surveillance infrastructure to ensure they can effectively counter Russia's strategies. According to experts, preparing for Russia's potentially aggressive and uncooperative behavior in Arctic negotiations is essential for maintaining stability and securing their interests in the region.
Our guest today is Witold Rodkiewicz. He's a senior fellow at the Russian department at the Center for Eastern Studies here in Warsaw. So welcome to the program once more.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
It's always a pleasure to discuss with you. Now we're going to discuss the Arctic Circle, the Arctic strategy, the Arctic option. From a Russian point of view, why explore the Arctic land, seas region?
Well, it's very simple. Russian economy is still, and it's going to be in the foreseeable future, based on the export of raw materials like gas and oil, also some metals and other raw materials. And increasingly, as all deposits in the south of the country are getting depleted, the increasing percentage of resources of the sort that I mentioned are going to be in the Arctic, in the far north. So from the point of view of the Russian leadership, this is absolutely strategic issue. I mean, they know that they will have to rely on these deposits which are in the far north to be able to function as an economy. Especially in the wartime, when this profile, this raw material profile of the Russian economy has been even more pronounced. Apart from the industrial production for the armed forces,
and the reserves of oil, gas, minerals, etc., that is as great as it's been explored and it's been calculated.
Yes, I think there are huge deposits there, and there's several the calculations that I saw. For 40 or 50 years, considering the present level exploration or drilling or recovery. So this is one very important thing. The second thing is strategic. If you look on the map, this is the shortest way from Russia towards to North America, to the U.S. There's a fear. There's always a fear during the Soviet times too. This is a possible entry point into what used to be Soviet and now is Russian airspace. This is a way to attack aims in central, western, southern Russia. Therefore, the Russian Federation made it a point after they started to recover economically in the first decade of the 21st century, to restore what has been abandoned and what's been neglected, namely the military infrastructure in the far north, which was complicated to maintain. It's kind of the conditions are difficult. So it was to a large extent neglected, but they rebuilt it. Radar stations, supply points, depots, and so on. So they also devoted quite a lot of attention to the creation of specialized military units, so-called polar brigades, which are supposed to be able to conduct military operations, infantry operations in these very harsh conditions. One more important thing is that if you look at Russian strategic deterrent, the sea-based strategic deterrent, it's based largely. Half of it is based in the far north, in Murmansk, hence in Kola Peninsula. This is an area which needs, from a strategic point of view, special protection, because you need to be able to defend the base and the submarines there with their nuclear missiles from preemptive attack. So this is also this western part of the Arctic is very important from that point of view. So for all these reasons, this is an extremely important area from the point of view of the Russian Federation.
Are the seas navigable, both in terms of the strategic Northern Fleet, its needs, and its needs to export minerals and oil?
Well,
are they just closed in again by?
They are still. They are closed, but that period of ice closure is shortening with the warming of the climate, and predictions are that this is going to get even better from the Russian point of view, in the sense that perhaps it would be possible to have the commercially viable ship traffic, commercial vessel traffic, all along the northern coast. The Russians have hyped a lot the so-called North Sea route that is supposed that they were hoping that it was supposed to take away some of the traffic, or a large part of the traffic that still going around Suez or around South Africa, around not Cape Horn, but Cape of Good Hope. This hasn't been happening so much. I'm not an expert in this, but I've heard experts developing various, giving good economic reasons why this is not so. But it's increasingly being developed. It's not North Sea route. It's being increasingly developed not as a transit route from Asia to Europe, but as an important sea link between these points at which extraction of, for example, gas, which is then liquefied, so LNG, and oil, to especially Asian markets. So there's a huge volume. There's increasing huge volume of traffic, but it's not. But the increase is not in transit between Europe and Asia, but this is traffic that with goods leaving Russia for for the world markets.
What's the NATO position? We've got two additional members, Sweden and Finland. Has NATO taken its eyes off the ball? It's been concentrating on the Central European plain, Ukraine, for example, the Middle East, China. Is this one of these theatres of possible operations that we haven't paid it the attention that it's worth?
Like
until now.
Like with everything that NATO was doing versus Russia, there was this, I think, there was this basic assumption that nothing serious is going to happen in terms of conflict. So there was neglect. I mean, I don't think people were not paying attention. If you talk to professionals, Navy people in Denmark or Norway, they were paying attention, and they were drawing attention of the politicians, the increased activity by Russian forces, especially under submarines, which were beginning to be very active frequently in places that are strategically extremely important, because they form. This is the places this is the part of the ocean through which supplies to the American forces in Europe would have to be carried in the case of conflict.
As in the Second World War.
Yes, and there was, yes, paradoxically, this is in spite of all the hype and technology. Some things are still there, but I think that the problem was with insufficient amount of investment in resources, because you might have all the technology in the world, but if you don't have platforms to use them, fly them, they're not much use. And this was, for example, like Britain, for example, lost its ability to patrol oceans. They completely got rid or neglected the naval air force.
Yes,
so this
requires
requires
a cat and mouse game between the Royal Navy, for example, and the Soviet Navy in the height of the Cold War in the 1980s up in that area.
Yes, and I think that there was this. NATO we all need, in that sense, to play catch up. And I think something, Norway, for example, is now announced a big program for expanding its navy. It has some problems because, again, some things are, some capabilities are simply lost. I mean, you stop. If you stop building ships,
yes, you lose the generation
then you
expertise.
You don't know how to do that anymore. Yes. Paradoxically, we think that it's all there, but it's not so simple. So it's the same with with a lot of things. In fact, it's also simply like explosives, which only 3 countries in Europe produce explosives any longer. And one of them using the Chinese raw materials for that. So it's kind of like strategically, it's completely crazy. But so I think NATO is beginning to pay attention. We need to make up for the lost time in terms of equipment and investment. I think the Scandinavians are quite serious about this, fortunately. And Sweden's and Finland's membership in NATO immensely improves NATO's position, because Norway was kind of a lonely outpost up there with a very narrow land strip, and it would be very difficult to defend in case of Russian attack, and their attack can be assumed because they are going to want to increase the buffer between their Murmansk strategic nuclear forces base and NATO forces. So and now with the solid mass of Norway, this place in the north where 3 borders meet, there is operational space, there is a possibility, and Finland has good forces. And Sweden, fortunately not, but Swedes will get there, I'm sure.
Powers, yes. So, is it right to say that the balance of power the balance of strategic power has changed in NATO's favour in that area? I mean, from a Russian point of view.
Yes, I would say it improved. It improved, but I think, and it's very difficult to. We know that units that used to be stationed and sort of facing Finland and Norway are now employed in Ukraine. So in that sense, it's improved. But in other areas, things don't look so well. If you look, for example, in the Baltics, then the situation is different. And there's of course question if you look at places like Gotland and so on. So there, the situation is somewhat different. Again, I'm not privy to NATO defense plans, and I'm not a professional military person, so I don't know how they are going to. But I suspect, knowing the basic assumption of NATO side, that is, they're not going to attack Russian territory, and there's going to be a huge reluctance to do that even if hostilities start. If the Russians attack on the Baltics and on us, I think there will be. I don't think NATO would be willing to exploit this local weakness or local advantage to sort of create, for example, threat and strategic basis. But I don't know. Of course, this is pure speculation on my side.
As we draw our discussion to a close, the Russians, as you mentioned, are investing heavily in the infrastructure to extract these resources. Is the West doing the same, or is this a Russian area now, well and truly?
Well, I mean, they are doing this on their own national territory, or on their economic zone. So this is. And as far as I think the major difference is that during the last 20 years at least, or 30, in the West, the development of economic development of the high north was restricted and was moderated by ecological concerns. And one of the big differences between the West and Russia in the so-called Arctic cooperation sphere was that the Russians were extremely their basic fear was that there are going to be regulations that are going to restrict their freedom to develop economically the far north. And in that sense, the difference was unbridgeable. I think it was fundamental. With the war, I think it's moot point. Nobody's going to impose anything on Russia. They don't have any interest in playing, being a good sport. So I think this issue sort of, as long as there is a condition of undeclared war, this is a moot issue. The Russians are going to develop their Arctic thing, and the West is going to have to also to improve their forces, because as far as specialized forces for operation in the Arctic, for example, the U.S., there are no icebreakers, or very few icebreakers. There are few specialized units.
Don't they? And Russia has a dozen or so.
Yes, the Russians have huge advantage in terms of their icebreaker fleet. The U.S. is far behind. Perhaps there are other capabilities that can make equalize the stakes, but yes, because this was seen as an area of peace and cooperation, and nobody for 20 years thought about this as a potential theater of war. The Russians started preparing for that, a decade earlier, yes. And we are behind. So,
Witold Rodkiewicz, thanks very much for coming in. That's all we have time for, unfortunately.
Thank you for the invitation. It's always a pleasure.
Great to have you. So that's all we have time for once more. So join us next time for How We Got Here.